Now, my goal in this class is to get the best picture on your wall. Now, I say that up front because photography and convenience, they have nothing to do with each other. And a lot of times people during my class, they'll ask me a question and they just want the really easy, convenient answer. And they'll say something like, hey, Okello, I'm going on a trip to Europe and I don't want to take 2 or 3 lenses with me. What's the one lens I can take on my trip that'll do everything? And you just have to understand, my mind just doesn't operate that way because I always want the best tool for the job. And the lens that does everything is not necessarily going to do everything well. And I would never walk up to a golf pro and say, man, there's a lot of clubs to carry around. Isn't there one golf club that'll do everything? And there's just no such thing. So all my answers in this class are based on getting the best picture on your wall. So that might involve a few more tools, a little more money, and a little more time. But the goal is the best picture on your wall and to get you more likes on Facebook. Now, to do that, I try to keep things relatively simple and let you know that we don't need to worry about every single button on your camera. Now, when I first started doing my classes, it was obviously a lot less formal, and it would be me and a few people sitting in a Starbucks talking about photography. Now, what would always happen at some point during the session is they would start pointing at every single button on their camera and asking me, now what about this button? What does this button do? What does this button do? And I would try to tell them, you don't need to worry about every single button on your camera. So I came up with this analogy and I would tell them, well, what if I were trying to teach you how to drive a car and we had a 2-hour lesson, but I start off with 15 minutes on the GPS. So I'm showing you how to save your home location, how you'd find all the Starbucks around you, and then we move on to 15 minutes on the satellite radio. I'm showing you how to sort the stations by genre. By the time we get to how you save your presets, you're going to be looking at your watch thinking, are we going to get to drive in the car? I mean, which one's a gas? Which one's a brake? How do I get this thing in first gear? I mean, that's what you really need to know to drive a car. So this is how I've structured the class to teach you those same basics of photography, because you should all realize photography hasn't changed that much in the last 30 years. So growing up as a kid, all I ever had to worry about were 3 things: your ISO, your aperture, and your shutter speed. Your ISO was your film speed. You'd buy 100, 400 film, dial it in over there. You change your aperture on your lens and your shutter speed right there. But you look at your camera nowadays and you are going to realize there's a lot more stuff back there. But the bottom line is we need to cut through all of this stuff for right now, and we only need to worry about those same 3 things: your ISO, your aperture, and your shutter speed, because that is how we get light to your sensor. And photography is all about getting light to your sensor. So if you can master those 3 things, you will master photography. Now, I will give you a warning before the class, and the warning I give everyone is photography is not easy, but I don't think it's hard, and it just takes a little bit of practice. Now, none of you would ever walk into a music school and expect to walk out playing a brand new instrument after 3 hours. And you never walk into a language school and expect to walk out speaking a brand new language after 3 hours. Photography is no different. Obviously, it's a lot easier than both of those, but it is not necessarily intuitive. So when you finish watching this video, you might look at your camera and say, wait, I think he said higher ISO is faster shutter speed. And you are going to have to process the stuff. That's when it'll start to make more sense. And I cannot teach anyone photography in 3 hours, or even in 3 months for that matter, if they are not going to pick up their camera and practice, because that is the part that will keep you from freaking out when you walk into your friend's wedding and it's dark in there. Or kids are running around the house, you're trying to figure out the shutter speed to freeze them. This is not when it's all going to come back to you. You need to practice when there's nobody around, no pressure on you. But I can guarantee you one thing will happen when you do that. This stuff will become so boring and predictable because your camera is going to do the same exact thing every single time, unless it's broken. It'll just take you a little bit of time to get over that hump before these things start making total sense. And anytime someone says to me, well, you know, ISO's just not quite sinking in, I say, you know what? If you were to sit in front of the TV and for an hour while you're watching some TV show, just sit there and go up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down on your ISO. I mean, seriously, how boring would it get? Trust me, it would get really boring. And that way, when you walk into your friend's house and it looks like your living room did, you won't even have to think about where you'll put your ISO. So you will have to go through that process before this stuff starts making total sense. Now, I do realize when I say that, it makes it sound like I'm going to make your life difficult, and just a little more difficult, but this is one way I'll try to make your life a little bit easier. I'll let you know that when it comes to taking pictures, those are the only two modes you will ever need: manual mode and aperture priority. Now, if you have a Canon, that's M and AV mode, manual mode and aperture priority. Now, the reason I can put it this simply is in photography, there are only two lighting situations you will ever face. Either you have enough light or you don't have enough light. So let's say you walked outside at high noon. It's really bright out there. You don't have to worry about light. You can shoot in aperture priority, which is the A or AV mode. And if you set your aperture and your ISO, your shutter speed would be fast enough. And that is what happens at your friend's barbecue on Saturday afternoon. Out in the backyard, you don't have to worry about blurry shots. Now, on the other hand, you walk into a dark room, your friend's wedding at night, your house in the evening, you are going to struggle with your shutter speed. If you're in aperture priority, you're going to get blurry shot after blurry shot after blurry shot. And that is when we shoot in manual mode, because in manual mode, we have total control of our shutter speed and we don't have to worry about blurry shots. Now, if that didn't make sense, don't worry. We'll get back to that a little bit later. But what we need to start off with is your aperture, your ISO, and your shutter speed. Those three ways we get light to your sensor. Now, the first one is your aperture. Now, your aperture controls the flow of light to your sensor, and your aperture is found in your lens. So this is a representation of the aperture that is found in all of your lenses, and I'm going to show you the actual aperture of this lens right here. So I'm going to hold this up and wave this around. So this is the actual aperture of this lens. Now, do not do this with your lens. So your camera will be moving this internally in just a second, but I want you to think about light flowing to your sensor the same way you would think about water filling up a bucket. If we were trying to fill up a bucket with water,